I'm driving the bookmobile for the Grief Center tonight.
Oh, I thought you'd do that during the day.
I usually do, but I got tied up at work and I didn't have time, and now I feel so guilty. There are so many depressed people out there with nothing to read. Of course, when I'm depressed, I can't read. I knit. Maybe I should drive a knitmobile. Maybe she should drive...
So I'm watching a snippet from the Golden Girls. You know, when I did that video on becoming an elder orphan, it really prompted a lot of comments about how we should all get together and live, you know, cohabitate and live communally or whatever, and live like the Golden Girls. So I started watching a whole bunch of Golden Girls episodes because I hadn't watched them in about 20 years at least. And so I had forgotten how funny they are, but we're going to talk about that today. So could we really, as older people, live like the Golden Girls, and would it work out? So that's what I'm going to explore with you today. So first I want to just say something about the Golden Girls, which when it came out in the 80s, I was in my 30s probably. I did not really watch it, honestly. I think I may have seen a few episodes. And then by the time the show ended and went into syndication, that's when I started watching a ton of them in like the late 90s. And I just became such a big fan of the show at that point. I mean, the actresses are so brilliant. The characters are so good. It was a great show. I mean, just absolutely a great show. And it ages pretty well. I mean, some of the topics and stuff you can tell are pretty dated, but it ages pretty well. But I watched a ton of it in the late 90s when I was probably in my early to mid 40s because I could see old age coming for me like a freight train at that point. I could see even in my late 40s what it was going to look like getting old. So I have watched a lot of that, and we're going to talk now about, okay, so what are some realistic aspects of it? What are some advantages of the idea of living like the Golden Girls? And then we're going to talk about some challenges of that. Let's talk first about the advantages of living in what's called either cooperative housing or shared housing or cohabiting, or there's many different terms for it. So there's a lot of advantages, especially for older people. I would say the top two advantages are sharing the expenses of living, which for most older people, especially on a fixed income, is so important. You know, if you're only can pay $300 a month rent, but you've got 4 people sharing a house, then you can at least rent a house for at least $1,200, maybe even a little more than that per month. Now, that's still hard to do in the times we live in today, so I don't know how realistic shared housing is if you're going to like rent a place. But the expense of it is a major reason to live together. The second major reason is loneliness. You know, for people who don't have any family, as I've discussed in other videos, or people who don't have good friends that, you know, come over regularly or do things for one another. So having, you know, a ready-made kind of household of people that look out for one another and can do things together. They can go to things, you know, to do activities together, go for walks together, you know, various things. That is a very attractive idea. It really is. And I can see why people would want to do that. Now, I think it's more important probably for people who are a little more extroverted that like being around other people a lot rather than an introvert who would rather be alone more. But it could still work if you have a household of introverts and they can still do some things together but spend a lot of time by themselves. So those are two of the biggest reasons, I think, for shared housing. Another good reason is sharing the household duties and responsibilities. In other words, you know, they can rotate like what needs to be done around the house. And so you don't have to be cleaning the kitchen every day as one person. Maybe you only have to do that every third day or every fourth day. And that makes it a lot easier because you don't necessarily have to do a bunch of household chores all the time. So I think that is a great idea. And I think beyond just the loneliness aspect, I think another one is that you have each other's backs. If somebody gets sick somebody has to go in the hospital, whatever. You've got people there that can, go visit them. They can bring things to them. They can help them, when they're at home recovering, things like that, or even just being sick at home. You've got people that can, do the grocery shopping, pick up anything, pick up your prescription for you. There's so many advantages to living in shared housing in that respect. And in that vein, it's the idea of being in a household where you're giving to other people. In other words, it's not just about you. When you are alone later in life, you become more self-absorbed just by default because you don't have a lot of people to look out for like you did maybe when you were younger and had a family. So what happens is when you live with other people, it kind of forces you out of that into being in more of a giving type of spirit. And that benefits everyone. If you're all like that and you're all giving to some extent to one another, that really helps you emotionally and mentally. And it keeps you having a sense of purpose in life. And so I think that one is very important as well. And then the last thing I would say is when you all share a household, it's more sustainable from an environmental standpoint than it would be if everybody's living in their own dwelling. So just from that standpoint, that to me is a little bit more of a minor point, but it is a good point. All right, so with that in mind, that those are the advantages of shared housing, okay, or living together, basically. So what would be some of the challenges of it? Now, when we look at the Golden Girls, of course, if you really, it's a comedy show, okay? So it's meant to be funny. And it is funny because it was well written. But if you really think about what they were saying to one another on a regular basis, there were a lot of insults going on in the house. There was a lot of teasing going on in the house. Would that really work in real life? Probably not. That would probably be, Dorothy was regularly calling Rose like an idiot or a dimwit, and they were calling Blanche a slut on a regular basis. So I don't think you'd be doing that with your housemates, is all I'm saying. So, that's just pointing out the difference between fiction and reality. Let's talk about some real issues, though, that are involved if you do this. If you choose to go into shared housing, let's say it's a group of women like the Golden Girls, although men could do this as well. But let's say you want to do it. I'd say the first thing that is a potential difficulty is if, as in the Golden Girls, Blanche is the one that owns the house, and the other women come in and then they rent rooms from her. Now that sounds fine, and it could work depending on if it's the right people. But I have found in my experience, even when I was younger and I rented rooms a few times, that when you rent rooms from somebody that's the homeowner and it's their space, there's an inequity there. There's not an even balance of power in the living situation. And to me, that could be a potential problem. It's not always, though. If you have a person that's a homeowner and they're a wonderful person and they're generous and they're open and they're welcoming, then maybe that's not an issue. But I'm just saying it is a potential problem. So in that case, I would say it's probably better if 3 or 4 people go into a shared housing situation and they pay equal amounts rent. In other words, nobody owns the house. They're renting the house. They pay equal amounts. I think that would be a far better starting point for something like this. That's just my take on it. The other thing I would say is everybody when you get older, you realize the importance of this. Everybody needs their own bedroom and preferably their own bathroom. Because when you get older, that's kind of an essential. You're willing to share a kitchen and a living room and stuff like that, but you really need your own bathroom and you need your own privacy, your own bedroom. When you're younger, you're more open to sharing a room or sharing a bathroom, and it's a lot easier. So I think that's another thing that would be an absolute to have like harmony in the shared housing situation. Another thing I think is important is taking into account the personalities of the people. In Golden Girls, these are very different women. The only reason it works is because it's fiction. It's a comedy. In real life, women that different in personality and interests and stuff, I'm not sure would have worked. So I think you have to pick people that there's some either shared interest or shared worldview or something like that to make the living situation a lot easier. I think that is a very important point. There also has to be some house rules that people abide by. And I think there have to be repercussions if people don't abide by them. You know, the problem becomes, especially in this day and age, if you get a nightmare renter that goes in on something like this and you don't realize they're a nightmare initially, but then they become a nightmare and there's 3 other people living in the house and they go, we can't live with her or him anymore, then you have to have a way that you can resolve that, because you can't just keep living in this very dysfunctional situation. So I think that has to happen. I think you also have to have healthy boundaries with one another in general. You know, you may have one housemate that's a lot more outgoing and needs to be around people more, and they're always wanting to come chat with you or whatever. But if you're more of a loner and you don't want that, you have to have a way to set boundaries about that. So I think there's a lot of intricacy to this in reality that you would need to work with. Do I think it'd be worth a try? Yeah, I think so. For most people, I think it would. For myself, I don't know. It would have to be the right group of people. I would probably want to live with a group of women, but I'm not sure what it would take to be the right situation, if you know what I mean. So I would just have to know the people to some degree and realize that I could get along with them. I don't know. I honestly, I've lived alone so long that it honestly would be a challenge for me to live with other people. Do I think it's a great idea in theory? Yes. I think it is, especially because of the practicalities of having people around in case there's an emergency or in case there's something that needs to be done. It's also great for loneliness and having companionship to go do things. I think it's really great to share expenses. So I think it's probably worth it. But the thing is, you may have to go through a couple of bad experiences with it to get to the right situation. So my end answer to this is the Golden Girls. Would it work? Yes, it would work, but with the right kind of people in the right situation. I think it could work. I think it's in theory a great idea. In reality, I think it would take a lot more work to make it work, if that makes sense. Until next time, be well, be kind, keep moving forward, and take care. Bye.